as far as I'm concerned, you're the Tory. Good morning. Do you have trouble getting a house? Have you had problems with an AHOP home? Are you sick and tired of the mortgage kerfuffles in Canada? It's all the fault of the Liberal government. At least that's what Dean Whiteway, the Tory critic on urban affairs and housing, is going to tell us this morning. Dean Whiteway is a Nova Scotian who's also going to recite Rabbie Burns' poetry to you this morning if he gets stuck politically. But I've got a surprise guest in my studio this morning, Evan Wolfe. Mr. Wolfe, why, may I ask politely, are you here today?
Jack, I'm here because of certain statements made about our Crown corporations by Dave Barrett yesterday in your show. I'd like to challenge these statements because I believe many of them are incorrect.
Evan Wolfe first, after the break. Tuesday morning, when Premier Bennett was on the programme, a woman from Parksville, now making herself famous, phoned up to ask what happened to the profits of the operations in the BC Resources Investment Corporation, particularly Cancel. And the Premier said he didn't have the figures with him. And I threw in a figure of $9 million and said, Mr. Bennett, you're not being evasive, right? We went on to discuss it in some minor detail. Then Dave Barrett appeared in the studio in the afternoon, which I used on Tuesday. Absolutely hoppy mad he was. And Barrett came in with the Cancel annual report, in which he said that the Premier had not told the truth about the facts of Cancel, the NDP purchase, which he said had in fact contributed $134 million in net earnings between 1973 and 1977, and had, in direct contradiction to what Premier Bennett said, paid income taxes. The Premier had left a clear impression that the income taxes were not liable to be paid in this particular kind of operation. Now, this is a difficult thing to follow. Basically, Barrett says Bennett not telling the whole truth. Barrett says Cancel a good socialist buy, NDP buy, their 80% shareholdings, and that he insists that Bennett have nothing to do with any kind of false prospectus. First of all, Mr. Wolfe, let's see the appropriate section of the Barrett clip so we know what you're going to be talking about.
I'm very mad or angry, Jack Webster, because of the fact that the Premier, first of all, did not answer the woman's question, and then when he was pressed by you, when you jumped in and tried to get an answer...
About the profits of Cancel.
About the profits of Cancel.
He didn't have the figures with him.
That's what he said. And then she said, well, if it's making a profit, where did the money go? And he said, to pay the debt, to pay the debt. Well, Jack, that's absolutely false. What are the facts? I brought you a copy of the 1977 annual report of Canadian Cellulose. And the truth of the matter is that, according to their own figures, profits from 1973, which were as low as $12.3 million, to 1977, $17 million. The high year was 1974 when it made $50 million in profits. It made a 5-year profit of $134 million. Now, Jack...
Now, he said on that program that this all went to paying debts,
At no time has the debt ever exceeded $79 million. And the debt has been serviced every single year, and after all the debt and income tax, which is also paid, they've made a total of $134 million profit.
I got the impression that because these were kind of Crown operations, there was no income tax payable by them.
He is absolutely false here, too, and he made that claim.
Why is that, though? Because a Crown corporation doesn't pay income tax.
You have to own 90%. In this instance, there are still private shareholders, and we did not buy them out, much to the dismay of some and satisfaction of others. Because we did not nationalize, we made a purchase. Only a little over 80% of this company is owned by the people. So you are
sitting here now, Dave Barrett, contradicting or supplying information the Premier did not give to me.
I say that the Premier of this province did not tell the truth when he said that those profits go to service the debt. That is false. I say he did not tell the truth when he said they do not pay income tax. That is false. And I go further. And I say that this company returned $80 million in modernization in 1 year, 1977, mostly out of profits and some new borrowings into providing jobs in this province. Now, if he's going to say these things, then he'd better be honest about what he's saying, because there are laws about issuing a false prospectus.
12.3 million net earnings after income tax paid in 73.
That is correct.
Adding up 50.9 in 74, 27.5 in 75, 26.1 in 76, 17.3 in 77 for a total of $134 million.
That is correct. $134 million profit.
Well, were you aware of the fact that $80 million largely from profits was used to modernize
Yes,
Cancells?
I said on Channel 8 yesterday in the interview that $80 million had gone back in 1 year. And where is that money going to come from? It means increased taxes, because that kind of money has to go back in to modernize and update. All of that $80 million in 1 year
has to go back and increase and update. Sorry about that little clumsy clip. We just lined that up at the very last moment. Mr. Barrett makes very serious charges. And I must confess, as a simple-minded layman, Evan Wolfe, when I look at the Columbia Cellulose Annual Report, I'm inclined to accept what he says. Now, can you answer my questions? Was the debt serviced? Did they or did they not pay income tax? Did the Premier not tell the truth about these profits, about servicing debts? Let's start from the top. It says here, net earnings over a 5-year period, $134 million.
Jack, either Mr. Barrett, who I've known for many years in the House, is totally ignorant, or he is attempting to mislead people, because you know, these allegations are trotted back and forward. And I don't think we should get into some ping-pong game on, you know, who says what. The fact of the matter is that he has trotted out the 1977 financial report of Canadian Cellulose. He has stated that they spent in that year $80 million on fixed assets, which were paid for mostly out of profits. That's what he said, I believe.
That's right.
Not so. Actually, they spent $77.8 million on fixed assets, as revealed in their financial report, if you just read it more carefully. And secondly, it was paid for partially by borrowing some $44 million. So it wasn't paid for largely out of profits. As a matter of fact, the profit in that year was $12.5 million. He also stated that the Cancel profits over a 5-year period were $134 million after income taxes.
Right.
Now, Cancel is subject to income tax like any other non-Crown corporation. But it, in fact, in 5-year period, since the government purchased the majority interest in it, has not paid 1 dime of income tax. In fact, neither has Plateau Mills or Kootenay Forest Products. So the point is that this profit of $134 million, which is accumulated over 5 years, is after adding back the credit for tax loss. In other words, there's a tax loss credit, or a gimmick under income tax law, where they in fact have not had to pay, even though they've provided for it on their books, they have not had to pay any income tax.
One at a time.
So the point I want to make there is that the real earnings of the company over the 5-year period are in fact $78.6 million before adding back the extraordinary item of income tax.
Okay, let me understand it. Barrett said $134 million net earnings over a 5-year period. You say not so. In fact, true profit on the 5-year period, $78.6 million. Right. You say that, in fact, even although this shows provision for income tax of 10, 25, 35, 39, 40, about $60 million, no such taxes were paid.
They did pay logging tax, which is viewed as an income tax in some quarters, but federal and provincial income tax, they have not paid 1 cent. They're providing for income tax out of those profits, and after that provision, you look at a total earnings of $78.6 million. So it's a matter of how you want to view the real profit of the company. The point being made by the Premier was that in all of these Crown Corporation acquisitions, in terms of the basic philosophy of NDP versus this government, the fact of the matter is that it doesn't return really very much money to the taxpayer in terms of buying hospitals, in terms of buying schools. That's the point that he was trying to make.
All right, I'm just straightening out my thoughts, and I'm fairly simple-minded. First of all, therefore, Barrett is right. No, Bennett, I suppose, is half right when he says they don't pay income tax, because they have tax losses in the past against which in the normal corporate fiddle, they can balance them. Is that right?
The Premier was referring to Crown corporations, and I'm sure Mr. Barrett was as well, in stating that no income tax, because...
Well, now, this is not, in this stage...
This is not a Crown corporation.
corporation.
No.
It is subject to income tax.
That's correct, yes.
It does show here provision for income taxes.
Right.
But the provision for income taxes is not, in fact, paid because of previous tax credits and losses. Is that correct?
I think under the accounting laws, they're obliged to provide for those income taxes, even though the later recovery item under extraordinary item adds back the provision because no tax is paid.
So the net earnings as shown here with the extraordinary items of tax credits are, in your views, not an accurate figure.
I'm trying to explain that the real net earnings of the company after normal provision for income tax are $78 million. And when you relate that to the total debt of 79, I think it really negates the argument which Dave Barrett has presented. Let's not forget, Mr. Barrett is the former finance minister of this province, and I'm quite well aware of the job that he has done in terms of expenditures of money, which increased over 27% per year in a 3-year period, and left this province with substantial debt, which it has never had for years and years.
Mr. Wolfe, hold your breath. I want one other bite at this particular cherry, because I'm not an accountant, Barrett is an accountant, you're an accountant, but we want to get it quite clear in the public minds what the issues are here. Evan Wolfe, basic facts. Barrett said from the book, and this is what I might look at as a purchaser of these shares in the market, net earnings in 5 years, $134 million. That must be an accurate figure. I mean, it's technically a correct figure to refer to.
Yes, it is. And I just want to point out that it's after the recovery of substantial income tax from a prior period. So it's inflated by virtue of an extraordinary item.
Are these paper profits?
In effect, yes.
You're saying that the correct profit for the 5-year period was, I think you gave me the figure of $79 million. $73 million.
The earnings before the extraordinary item.
Yes.
Right.
$73 million.
$78 million.
$78.6 million.
That's correct.
That's point number one.
Yeah.
Bennett said that profits were used to pay debts, pay debts, pay debts. Is that what the profits were used for?
Jack, the Premier pointed out that he did not have the figures here. If you take a 5-year period, it's different than speaking about the 1-year period of 1977. In fact, the profits of that company over a period of 5 years went to pay for fixed assets, it went to retire some long-term debt, a substantial amount, it went to provide a minimal amount of dividends to the shareholders, and those are the 3 principal areas where those profits were spent. In fact, the point to be made is that in the year 1977, where Barrett trotted out the financial report of Canadian Cellulose, he was completely inaccurate and misleading people by saying that was contributed to mostly the fixed asset expenditures were derived out of net profits.
In fact, you say of that 79, 44 million was borrowed. There was 12 million profit that year, but 37 million of that 80 million came out of profits then.
No, not 37. No, it'd be less than 37. It'd be somewhere around 32 or 33, including the add back for. It's a very complicated accounting matter.
I know, but including the
44 million was borrowed, which is 60% of the amount spent.
Just hold your breath a second, please, Mr. Wolfe, Minister of Finance. The money was used to service debts. Some of the profits were used to service the Cancel debt of $79 million.
That's correct.
There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
Well, people are going to have to make up their own mind on this. The fact remains that Cancel is, and I must put this to you quite bluntly, a money-making operation, even under the NDP 80% control of the shares with public purchase.
Nobody is arguing that, Jack. The point that was made by the Premier is that in the acquisition of these Crown corporations, it is against the philosophy of this government, which is that these should be owned by individual enterprise. We encourage individual ownership, which is the whole concept of the BC Resource Corporation share issue. Barrett and the NDP are against this. They're in favor of nationalizing everything, which in our view doesn't return to the taxpayer the similar dollars which could have been spent directly on hospitals and schools.
Okay, last question. Had this stayed under government 80% ownership, the profits derived from this in due course, including the benefits of the income tax credits, would have gone back as a dividend to the general revenue of BC if they paid $1 a share, for instance.
In due course, dividends would accrue to the province. But here's a period of 5 years where very little, just dribs and drabs of dividends, came back to the shareholders or the taxpayer. So I think what should be said, though, is that here is a viable corporation in which it profited substantially through the price of pulp in prior years. Now, the price of pulp dropped, and in that period of time, they spent a lot of this money then on modernization of their plant. They're now in a position, looking forward, to do a job for their shareholders, who will be individuals in this province and not the government. The government is not a good manager, and that's pretty well accepted by history, Jack, and we're opposed to that, and we feel that we should promote individual ownership and enterprise.
Barrett said that the Premier did not tell the truth about these profits. You say he did. Well, he didn't know the figures about the profits, did he? The Premier didn't.
The Premier did not have any of this information in front of him. In fact, I challenge anyone to be more knowledgeable about the background of these corporations than anyone that he does. He's very familiar with this whole operation, but he didn't have the analysis over a 5-year period of how the profits were devoted.
It is correct that this particular operation in its present corporate structure is liable for income taxes, but didn't in fact pay them. It was able to use it to its bookkeeping advantage because of the previous losses of Cancel.
That's correct.
Because you buy the losses. That's why the thing was for sale for $1 plus $70 million in debt.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, right.
What have we solved this morning, Mr. Wolfe? Nothing.
Well, only the fact that Mr. Barrett, in taking umbrage with what the Premier had said, in trying to make the argument that Crown corporations are not really in the best interests of, when involved in industry, are not in the best interest of the public, he made more misleading statements than could be alleged of anyone else. In the information he put out, he's obviously not capable of putting the picture forward because he doesn't have the ability to translate that information.
All right. I am a non-partisan person, as you well know. I hate all of you equally. I criticize all of you equally. I must confess that when Mr. Barrett left me the other afternoon, and even now, I look on Cancel as a money-making operation which, depending on your philosophy, either returns dividends eventually to the Crown and the people of BC, or makes brick a better buy. How's that? That's well put, Mr. Webster, to Mr. Wolfe.
I don't accept the first part of your equation, but it does represent an important asset in terms of the value of which will be determined by the prospectus that will be put forward. As far as
I'll concede that neither Mr. Barrett nor the reporter, Mr. Webster, are chartered accountants, but it comes through loud and clear that your case is, one, it didn't make $134 million because these corporate income tax credit fiddles reflect a picture which the layman should not accept at face value, right? And therefore, it was either going to be a good thing for BC or a good thing for the brick shareholders. But I'm quite happy to have given you the opportunity of the explanation and have learned a little more about accounting.
Okay, thanks, Jack, for allowing me the opportunity to try to explain it.
Dear listeners, dear viewers, dear whoever you are, get a copy of the Cancel report, make a transcript of your tape, and make up your own minds. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe.
Thank you.
So this is a great moment. You're a legend across the country, and here I am, face to face with you. Well, I've heard that expression too, but.
Walden Dean Whiteway. Very pleased to meet you, Walden. Or do I call you Dean?
You better call me Dean.
Progressive Conservative candidate for, what a name, Winnipeg Birds.
Well, that's a new riding, it's Selkirk.
Oh, Selkirk, Manitoba.
Yeah, and speaking of Selkirk and speaking of Scottish, I'm disappointed.
Oh?
I was promised that today, being Robbie Burns Day, that I would come here and you would look like a Scotsman. And instead, I come here and you look like you're from Bay Street, Toronto. I really am disappointed. You've got whatever you call that thing in the bag over there. So you haven't even taken it out of the bag yet. What do you call that? Not being a Scotsman, I don't know.
That's a sporran.
Oh.
Matter of fact, little story to tell about that later. However, Dean, I'm not a professional Scotchman. I'm a Canadian who's been here a long time, and Robbie Burns is my hero, but he doesn't bring that much of an audience, so we don't make a great big fuss about the wee man that was very fond of a dram.
So, So in other words, when you're on radio, it was okay, but now you're on television, you have to look the part, right?
You've got to be a Canadian.
Okay.
After all, we're going to have a conservative government.
Right.
And if one wants to
True.
get on, one's going to have to be terribly well dressed and look the part, right?
Right.
Now, so you should see me when I get off there. Jean Piggott and you are the two Tory critics in housing. Now, the Urban Affairs Committee, of which you're a member, has made a number of attacks on the Liberal administration of CMHC, the AHOP programs and whatnot. But it seems to have lost a focus in the West here. I think maybe that we've had a surplus of certain undesirable types of condominium and strata-titled buildings. People are not getting what they wanted. In what way would it be any different under the Lord help us, the Conservatives, notorious for not looking after the needs of the ordinary working man?
Well, I'll not. I'll just disregard your last half of your statement. I'll.
Give me an attack on the Liberals. That's what I want.
No. You see, you're wrong on that. We don't attack the Liberals.
Who do you attack?
We're not attacking anybody. We're simply making observations of how the housing policy and CMHC have or have not worked.
Okay.
And the fact is, in honesty, they haven't worked. AHOP is a disaster. We have unparalleled numbers of walkaways and defaults in AHOP right across the country. In Ontario alone, in the first 3 months of this year, and you watch, the facts will bear me out, we will have over 8,000 notices of foreclosures from CMHC going out to homeowners. And I know, and I'm going to a development this afternoon, I think there's only 4 AHOP homes there, but 3 of them have walked away. Why? Because at the end of a 5-year period, did you understand how AHOP works?
I did, but I forget.
Okay.
Give me I'd like
I'll
to
give
be
you
briefed
15
on it. No, I'd like to be
okay.
briefed on it, and so would
Okay.
everybody else. Assisted home ownership program.
Right.
Terribly complicated. Many little builders went belly up. Other builders said, okay, I'll take you into AHOP, but I want $1,500 underneath the table, cash direct, apart from the real estate, to put in a fireplace, which didn't work.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Okay. Basically, it was this. It's a subsidized program where CMHC and the government assumes that 8% is a fair interest rate to pay. And so you come in to buy an AHOP, and is, of course, based on your income. And under the laws of the country, you're not allowed to spend any more than 30% of your income on housing. Now, you can add up all your debts, your car payment, your TV payment, and so on, and that's called your gross debt ratio. You can't spend more than 40% of your gross debt ratio, including your house payment, on a home, you see. So you add them all up together.
Under AHOP?
Under any program, but under AHOP as well.
Right.
Okay. Now, when you add all those up, supposing it came to over 40%. So then the government would say, okay, we will subsidize your interest rate from 8% to whatever the market rate was at the time you bought your house, supposing it was 11%. 5 years ago, it would be that. A couple of years ago, it may be as low as 10.25%. So they subsidized 2.25% or whatever the difference was. That's for a period of 5 years. And the government sends the homeowner of an AHOP that difference by a check each month, and they take that money and they pay it on the mortgage payment. At the end of 5 years, you go to the bank as a normal mortgage and you renegotiate your next 5-year term for your mortgage. The interest rates today, as you know, are up to 12.5%, 12.75%. So what we're finding is that, number one, the AHOP owners not only have to assume the regular mortgage payment, which would be substantially higher because they've been subsidized for the first 5 years, but they also have to begin to pay back the subsidy that they had received for the first 5 years.
So here they're stuck with a new mortgage at 12.5%,
Yep.
plus the repayment of the subsidy got the first 5 years.
Exactly.
Unemployment would just wreck their plans altogether.
Yeah. And what's happened to wage settlements over the last 2 or 3 years?
Down under the IB.
Exactly. So the real income that they have to make the payments, the house payment and all the other payments they have, really is not as much as it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Back to your original shattering statement. In Ontario alone, how many thousand people have walked away from AHOP?
Well, I don't know how many walkaways, but there will be over 8,000, these are CMHC figures, over 8,000 notices of default. In other words, when you're more than 3 months in arrears in your payment, you're in a foreclosure position, and CMHC, who act as guarantors on the loans to the banks.
The guarantors, you mean
Right.
they get the builder off the hook?
Exactly, or whoever gave them the mortgage. Could be the Royal Bank.
The Royal
Bank,
Trust,
sure,
anybody.
anybody, right.
They get them off the hook.
Yep, yeah,
but
that-
on the foreclosure, the poor little guy who's been struggling for 5 years is out in the snow.
He's out in the snow, right.
Have there been many evictions from AHOP homes? Do you
Yeah.
have figures on that?
It's difficult to get exact numbers. We get dribs that, usually from people who were victimized by it.
Right.
But there are more, and this is the interesting thing, Jack, there are more walkaways than there are defaults. And because people simply come to the point where they say, look, I can't afford to pay it. I just can't afford to pay the new
I got to go
rate.
back to a basement suite at
Yeah.
$350 a
Right.
month,
That's right.
or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's really quite tragic.
Yeah.
What happens when they walk away? Is the house then sold at a loss by
Yes.
CMHC?
Yes. Generally, they put it up as a premium house, and by a premium house, they establish a loss. And in real estate, the dictum is your first loss is your best loss, or your least loss. And so they'll immediately discount the house. And it may have been originally $45,000. And of course, at the end of 5 years, you owe more on the house than the house is worth, because real estate values, of course, haven't escalated, haven't appreciated in the last several years.
Now, when I walk away, supposing I'm in one of these intolerable situations, and I walk away, do they chase me, or is that the end of it?
No, that's the end of it. You see, your responsibilities under your contract were namely to make your mortgage payments. And if you didn't, they take your house. That was a collateral mortgage. Well, not a collateral mortgage, but your collateral for your home was your home itself. So if you don't make your payments, they come and take your house.
Does that apply to anybody's house anywhere at any time?
Yes.
I mean, the house is, you can walk away from a house.
Sure, yes. But you see, the difference, Jack, is this. If you go to buy a house, you will be required to have some equity in it, you see, so that always the amount that you owe in your mortgage will be less than the value of your house. So you would be stupid to walk away from a house that is worth more than you owe on it. You'd sell it, right? And
Did you warn the Liberals about this scheme when they started it?
Yes, sir. It's a matter of record, and I don't want to take the attitude that we told you so. But you asked a question, and I will immodestly say that as a record of Hansel will show that several years ago, we pointed out the real problems with AHOP. I mean, it was projected. It was based on two premises that were pretty shaky. Number one is that real incomes would increase, and secondly, that inflation would put the value of the house greater than the mortgage. And therefore, if your mortgage was 45 and your house was worth 60, you wouldn't walk away, right?
You'd have an equity.
Right.
You could conceivably
Exactly.
sell it.
Right.
But we know what happened to the
But
housing
neither
market.
of those two things happened, and that's why we're in this.
The other problem, was it not, was that AHOP housing cost levels were frozen at certain arbitrary figures, were they not?
Yeah.
Say from 30,000 to 55,000.
That's right. Well,
across the country.
Yeah.
30,000 to 50.
Yeah. Okay, the problem with that was once you establish a ceiling as to the maximum value of an AHOP house, that does not become a ceiling. You know what that becomes? It becomes a floor price.
I suppose so.
You see? And builders immediately build a house to that level. When was the last time that you've seen an AHOP house in an area of Winnipeg where the maximum is 42.5? Have you seen an AHOP house for less than 42.5? Of course not. Your ceiling becomes your floor. And that's a problem.
Yeah, what was happening here was they were taking a $20,000 lot and putting a $15,000 shack on it and charging the maximum.
Yeah. Okay, but more important, Jack, I think that we should talk about is not what was wrong with the Liberal policy, because that's evident. I think what we really have to put our minds to is what will we do differently.
Webster and Dean Whiteway, Urban Critic, Conservative Party. Dean Whiteway, Progressive Tory MP for Selkirk. We'll use Selkirk.
Right.
We can't say Winnipeg, Bird Hills, Manitoba. Is that right?
That's right.
Political scientist to trade. Teacher.
Yes, sir. I'm one of those useless creatures who are political scientists.
Now, you talk about the AHOP defaults, AHOP walkaways. I see a figure here that there are 25,000 unsold housing units of CMHC on the market. Does that mean they're all AHOP defaults?
Well, they may not be AHOP defaults. They may be AHOP units which have not yet sold, and there's a number of those across the country.
The only guys who can't lose on this deal are the finance companies.
That's right. And worse than that, the new graduated payment mortgage scheme is even more ludicrous, because now there's a 90-day clause for defaults. That is, you can be essentially 3 months in arrears before the CMHC, who are the guarantors on the loans to the banks, trust companies, or whatever. So you have to be 3 months in arrears before they can come and take your house. Under the graduated payment mortgage, the government would allow the banks to get out in 30 days. 1 month behind, and zap, they foreclose.
This is a point I want to make. They come up with this scheme of ticky-tacky boxes. And for 42.5 in Winnipeg, the Lord knows what they build in your climate,
not
right?
much. Right.
You can't have no basement houses in Winnipeg, can you?
No, sir, no, you have to have a basement.
You got to have a basement.
Yes.
Here we have a ticky-tacky box with a guy who's encouraged to go in on a temporary subsidy in his mortgage only,
Yes.
going to be faced with that, and then a rising mortgage because that's what's happened,
Yes.
and no increase in his wages. And the only people who walk away free and clear with all the money they ever put in it, plus their interest, are the banks, the trust companies, and the mortgage lenders.
That's right.
It's not right.
No, sir, it isn't. And I guess that's the difference in basic mentality between the present government.
Well, what would you do? Well,
Okay.
I mean, how are you going to be quite brutally honest, how are you going to be any different? You'd probably just close the scheme and put everything back on the free market,
No,
which
sir.
might be better.
Well, sir, you have to establish, first of all, some fundamental principles from which you operate. Number one, you don't subsidize brick and mortar.
Or
You
banks.
That's it. You subsidize people. There is a need in this country for a social housing policy. There are Canadians who are working Canadians, but don't earn enough money to be able to afford to buy their own house on a straight draw basis, on a competitive market basis. And so we can say to those people, we have to have a program that we subsidize you and not a house. See, right now, this cup is an AHOP house, and we subsidize a builder to build it. He builds it any way he wants. Now, I'm no builder. I go into a house and I see a house has walls and it has a roof. But whether the walls are 2x4 or 2x2 or what the insulation factor is, I don't know. And I'm no builder, and I wouldn't know if you told me whether it was good or bad. And so what happens is that people come to, and if they are qualified to be subsidized, they have to come and buy this house here. We say no. We say subsidize the people. Let them take the money in their grubby little hands, see? Let them go out and they'll go. They look at my house, they don't like it, they can go and look at other
You're
houses.
talking about something which was started by W.A.C. Bennett many years ago and was very successful. Has since been trimmed quite a bit, the home acquisition grant.
That's right. Basically, where you subsidize people and let them choose what area they want to live in.
But you'd have to have a substantial home acquisition grant. You'd need to have about $10,000 so they could get into it.
No, sir, no, sir. See, for instance, try this on now for visionary thinking. Supposing we activated and proclaimed the Mortgage Exchange Corporation, which was passed by Parliament years ago but has yet to be proclaimed. Mortgage Exchange Corporation, similar to Ginnie Mae and Fannie Mae in the United States.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, but
I haven't a clue.
Well, I'll give you a little brief on this Mortgage Exchange Corporation. Supposing we allowed Canadians to invest in a Mortgage Exchange Corporation in Canada, and we guaranteed them 7% return on their money. And we said that Canadians who invest in the Exchange Corporation would have to pay no capital gains tax on that 7% money. Tax-free investment, okay?
Like a municipal bond in
Right,
the States.
that's right, okay? And if you look at that really means about a 10% return if they had to pay tax on it.
Right.
Okay? Then with that money that we had in the Mortgage Exchange Corporation at 7%, supposing then we said we are going to lend that money out to people who need assistance at 1% service cost over 7. And so the people could then come in and borrow money to buy a home at 8%. No subsidy. It doesn't cost the Canadian taxpayers a nickel.
It does. You lose the benefit on the by directing that money into a tax-free. You said capital gain free. Do you also mean income tax-free?
Yes, sir.
Okay, into a tax-free investment. There will be a certain loss of direct revenue to the Treasury from from taxable investments by these same people.
Yes, but you see, look at the record. Last year, how much did the federal government receive from all capital gains in the country? How much?
Don't know.
$600 million. A pittance compared to the amount of the total revenues of the country. And so what we're saying, the government does not receive much from capital gains anyway.
I've got your Mortgage Exchange Corporation. Is it your idea, or is Clark still a committee on it?
Well, sir,
Is it Tory policy?
the Mortgage Exchange Corporation?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Official policy?
Yes, sir.
One of the things you will do
Yes, sir.
without delay?
Yes, sir.
Sounds like a good idea. Amazing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, but if you think that's exciting, look at our mortgage interest deductibility program. For those who are, see, this will get people who are not in a home. That'll get them in.
Trudeau told me there's no way the government could afford to allow Canadians to deduct the income tax from the mortgage from the interest in the mortgage from their income taxes.
Well, I can understand him saying that because right now he owes $12 billion this year, you see. And so, I don't wonder why he would say he can't afford it, but it doesn't say that we would do the same thing as he's doing. I tell you, sir, if you look at the track record of the Liberal government, you look at the facts, and look at the debt that they've incurred, and you look at the program, the commitments that we've made, zero-based financing, sunset laws.
Sunset? What's a sunset law?
Well, you in the West should know about sunsets, but I'll tell you the sunset laws. And that is a concept, Jack, that, you know, I don't know how many programs we have in the federal government, but we've got hundreds that have been on the books for years and years. Originally, they were set up, they had a purpose, and they fulfilled a need for the country. But they go on and on and on and on every year. The sunset laws simply say that every year, these programs will have to come before Parliament and justify their existence, and if they can't,
out.
Out.
Questions to Dean Whiteway really from Nova Scotia. Funny accent you've got.
No, I kind of thought, sir, that yours was rather funny. South Shore, Nova Scotia. Everybody talks like this down there, you know.
Well, I like to see local boys that keep their accents. That's why I kept mine.
Right.
You know, I didn't want people to think I was English. That's a racist remark, and they can sue me for it. You can only insult the English, you know, or the Scots, because we have sufficient superiority. We don't give a damn what you say anyway. Okay. I might be more interested in calls. I'd like to hear from some AHOP disasters. I'm always full of warmth and good cheer for other people. With Dean Whiteway. AHOP, good man, don't go away. There have been all kinds of problems with Rudnicki and Tehran and CMHC administration. In one short, well-chosen sentence, would you fire the lot and start again? Is it a bad bureaucracy, CMHC?
In large part, yes, there ought to be some changes made.
Is it really a feather-bedded outfit? Or is it just cumbersome?
Well, I'll make a categorical statement. In the case of Tehran, it was a political appointment, and Tehran would have to be replaced. And he's deputy minister and chairman of CMHC.
And is he not a very good friend of Mr. Trudeau's?
Yes, he is a good friend.
Yeah, I mean, he's a liberal appointment. You don't like the way he runs the thing?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, fair enough. Go ahead, please.
Okay, Jack, I just have two real quick questions. And number one, the first question is on this 7% deal. Is this on top of the income tax deduction that they proposed? And then I have another question after that.
Yes, it is. They're really two separate programs. The Mortgage Exchange Corporation would deal specifically with subsidized or social housing. The deductibility of mortgage interest rates and property taxes really applies to those who already own their own homes. So they're two really separate programs.
Okay. Now, the other question, I hope you let it go through. It's not exactly on this, but if you got into power, what would you do with the Canada Pension Plan program, seeing how it's going broke? Thanks.
You want to tackle that?
Well, just briefly...
it's not going broke with Canada Pension Plan yet, is it?
No. But one of the problems with the Canada Pension Plan, Jack, as you know, is that they don't set the funds aside as an insurance company would do. They use the funds in general revenues, and they just simply deem it to be there in the books, and that's one of the problems. If the funds were actually there, as an insurance company or trust company would be required to do.
Isn't that the problem with the whole business of federal pensions?
Yes, sir, it is.
So much of it is deemed to be there.
Yes, and it is.
And the poor old civil servants say, we've got 900 million, and it's not there.
Right, that's right.
It's got to be recovered from loans to the provinces or out to the taxpayer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm a vice chairman of the Strata Corporation here in the AHOP I live, and I'm quite happy here. I think it's a nice enough house. And I receive $89.16 from the government a month, and it's very good. And the smart thing to do with that money is to put it in the bank and let it earn 9.5% interest. I think we can pay that money back after 5 years when we have to start paying it back. But the problem with AHOPs has been that they've pitched them to the single mother with a couple of kids who's earning maybe $10,000, $12,000 at the most, and her income just doesn't keep up with her expenses. I'll hang up and listen.
Good observations, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, well...
I mean, they're not all bad, he's telling us.
No question about it.
Listening to you and me, you might think the whole thing is a total disaster.
No, I simply, you know, and I'm not backpedaling at all. I'm saying that the basis on which AHOP was founded has some pretty shaky principles. Those who find themselves in a position of being able to afford it, and there are certainly a number of those people who, what we call, are in the income mobility bracket, that is, they have the chances for raises, and the real raises are substantial, then they have no problems in
Well, the
5
wife goes
years
back
of-
to work, and the kids go out and make $1.
Right,
Not
there's
like
lots of
all of a
things, sure.
sudden
Yeah.
they can take their 89.16 a month, put it in the bank at 10%,
That's right.
and make $100 a year interest on it.
Yeah, there's certainly no question about it. Many AHOPs that are good.
1303 from Kitimat. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Like I'd like to make a statement. Well, just to your guest there, I think just like his statement, they're misleading because if the conservative government was to come in power, there would be like a worse government because they are mostly of a big corporation.
Well, I'd rather have a question on housing. We can have the hyperbole any day of the week, and it's not often have a guy who knows much about housing.
Okay then. Well, anyway, like I can tell him, just like in Ontario, there are houses there which are for $32,000, and they're 3 bedrooms, and they're well good houses, and people do buy them.
Okay, thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to make a few points against the AHOP program. I bought an AHOP home 2.5 years ago, and ever since the initial, ever since about 6 months after we moved in, we've had nothing but problems. Now I'm speaking on behalf of an association here in Surrey. We've had numerous problems with our homes. We've, contacted the builders, contacted CMHC, with no result. Now we're involved into an association, and we're going to carry it a lot further. The thing I agree with your guest is that, a lot of homes, like people buy a home, they're happy to buy a home. They don't have an idea of how to build a home. They go in, it looks good. Once you're in there for a little while, then you find out what all the problems are, and you try to get them corrected.
What kind of problems are you having in your place?
A very bad sagging roof, and this is not only my house. This is the whole, the whole neighborhood.
You mean the overall roof is sagging?
That's right.
Jolly.
The materials used were of cheap quality, although they were approved by CMHC. Which, the builder is covered as far as that's concerned because, he went according to CMHC. Now we can't get any CMHC inspectors to come and look at it.
They won't come and look at it? If the CMHC inspectors came, could they do anything at all?
No, once the original inspection was done and the funds advanced to the builder, the CMHC inspectors are required to sign the progress reports. And once they sign those, there's really no recourse through the builders because the builders have been cleared by the inspectors. That's one of the problems across the country is that the inspecting has been rather...
haphazard?
Yeah, and not to the same quality as you would get inspecting in the private sector. And we would, when we formed the government, in cases where the quality of the house did not meet normal building standards, we would take out of CMHC mortgage insurance funds that would bring those AHOP homes up to standard.
Are there mortgage insurance funds there untouched now?
There are about $615 million right now in CMHC mortgage insurance fund.
Are you being rash enough to say that where AHOP has done bad construction and there is no recourse to the builders, no possibility of a successful lawsuit, no provincial government help, that you would consider using that some of that 615 mortgage insurance funds to repair these houses?
I'm saying categorically that we will.
That's really quite a political incentive. I wasn't going to say bribe. It sounds like
No, it's not a bribe.
essential.
That's it. They bought these houses in good faith. People who purchase homes are not themselves, most of them, experts in building. And so they ought not to be victimized by a government program.
Did you hear what he said?
Yeah, but I do have more comments on that against the AHOP program. I just picked up a newspaper here this morning, which is just around, just down the street, another AHOP program, by a different builder than mine, although mine is apparently quite reputable, but it didn't turn out that way. These people are having problems, with condensation. They can't wash the moisture away. They can't do this. They can't do that. The foundations are cracking everywhere. It's continuous problems, and whenever you go and try to get, the builders to come around, they'll come around, they patch it up. They've patched up my roof like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, well, I think we've covered your problem fairly well. Now, what action are you getting locally out of CMHC now? They won't come out and inspect your place?
we've contacted, as the association here, CMHC in Vancouver, in New Westminster. We've contacted the builders at their head office in Alberta. We've almost run out of avenues.
Well, you best to go through your MPs. Get
That's
a good,
right.
noisy MP. There's no doubt about it. That's the best way to go.
Call Bob Winman. In BC, call Bob Winman with your
I'm sure the
problems
least that Wenman can do for you is get a CMHC official out to see you.
I'd be very surprised because there's been...
Try it anyway. If he lets you down, let me know. Go ahead, please.
Yes, well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm sorry you didn't give the public a chance at Mr. Wolfe. But
look, that was for a particular reason, and if you want, I'll explain it. First of all, we start with Bennett, then we start with Barrett, then we have Wolfe. I've explained it as lucidly as I can. I made quite clear what my final sum up was. I was not going to get involved in a lengthy, complicated accounting argy-bargy for another hour and a half.
Okay. As far as this mortgage assistance is concerned, I'm sure that is one of the major things that will get this government elected if they go through with it. I just want to know if they're serious about it. Because in my case, when I pay $5,600 a year in payment and interest for my mortgage, and $444 comes off of my principal, leaving 51.5 is interest. That'll make me vote for this government if they're going to come through for it. But
it's staggering,
okay,
isn't it?
Yes. Okay. Let me make a categorical statement on that. I want to tie it in with what a previous caller, he intimated that the Conservative Party are really the corporate elite, the corporate rich. Well, down in Nova Scotia, my father is a shoemaker, a cobbler, and I grew up working in the cobbling shop. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We didn't have central heating, and so I don't come from a background of wealth. And I don't have to be in politics. I can make more money doing a lot of other things. So when I say to you that the part of the Conservative government are these kinds of visions, I'm not making political small talk. I'm making a categorical commitment that these are the things that the government will do, and we'll do them quickly, and we'll do them decisively.
Thank you, sir. Back to Dean Whiteway in a couple of minutes. So if you win, we'll get the Mortgage Exchange Corporation for sure.
Yes, sir.
You'll try and get Canadians to take the money out of the bank, put it in a 7% tax-free investment. You keep saying capital gain tax. You not mean income tax-free too?
No, well, that's how you claim your capital gains on your income tax form. We're talking about capital gains.
Okay, and then you would deduct mortgage interest for homeowners only?
Yes, sir. And to a maximum of a $50,000 mortgage or $5,000 per year.
Oh, that was the Clark
Yeah.
promise a while back.
Yes, sir, yeah.
50,000.
Yeah.
That's not too rich, is it?
No. People claim that this is a program for the rich. Well, the facts are that 67% of homeowners in Canada make less than $15,000 a year. Only 6% of all homeowners in Canada make over $25,000 in terms of salary income. So we're talking about a program that really covers 94% of the Canadian homeowners.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to direct mine. It's not a complaint about AHOP, but what he has said this morning to help the people to buy a home. We're in that position where we're not able to because my husband only makes $4 an hour, so they won't allow us to buy a home. Yet we have to pay the going rent of $350 a month, and that is way more than what your 30% of your gross income is. So I am most interested in hearing what this chap has to say as to how he'll help the poor working man out that's working and not on welfare, which I think we'd be better off if we were. I don't know welfare rates, but I know my husband works, Last year he only got 10 cents an hour raise. How can you own a home or have it for 3 children and a wife on that?
God knows.
Okay, well, that's an excellent comment. And I am not in a position today to announce our social housing policy. But I want to say, without any political double talk or dribble, that we have an exciting social housing policy. And that is directed to those Canadians who are working or for whatever reason, through no fault of their own, are on welfare. And a program that's, to me, as exciting, if not more exciting, than our interest deductibility. But it's a prerogative, as you can understand, of my leader to make that kind of an announcement. We've hammered it out in caucus. We've gone across the country. I've been down to the United States and I've studied their housing policies. And that announcement, I imagine, would be made during the political campaign.
The detailed announcement. But meanwhile, what you're saying is the mortgage exchange is a committal, mortgage interest deductibility is a committal.
That's a commitment.
You've got to find another way, though, to get money into the hands of people so they can get into the market for a house.
Yes, I would suggest that without releasing the program, that the housing allowance, expect that the housing allowance would be the route that possibly we would take.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead from Prince George.
Yes, this is some of the problems that we had. I'm not going to go into them a great deal, but we had situations here where the CMHC inspector was supposed to have done inspections, and there were several people in the community within the neighborhood who could prove absolutely those inspections were never made. And then afterwards, they claimed that things were the way they should be. Now, there were houses that were missing finishing touches. There was no paint except just what went over the gyprock on top, et cetera, et cetera. So all these problems, the people said, fine, we want our specs for the houses. Now, the specs for the houses, of course, were held by the municipality. They were held by CMHC and by the builder. We couldn't get any from any of them. And
They must be available, surely.
Oh, yeah, the spec should be available. Can I simply ask your viewer to do this? I don't know what project she's talking about, but could I ask her to call Bob Wenman, or write Bob Wenman, and because Bob has been handling the AHOP in BC for the committee. Call Bob Wenman, write him, and we'll look into this immediately. We'll come right to your project, right to your home, and we'll sit down and we'll protect your, the confidentiality as much as we can, and we'll look into these projects. We've been doing it right across the country. Every time we get reports like this, that there were serious deficiencies by CMHC, we look into them, and we look into them immediately. So if you would do that, if you would write or phone Bob Wenman, ma'am, we'll look after it within the week.
Sounds fair, ma'am, doesn't it?
where do I, yes, it does.
Bob Wenman, House of Commons, Ottawa.
Yes.
Now, let me tell you this, though. Now, this was a regular home. This was not an AHOP home, so you can imagine the problems they're having with AHOP.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, try that. Let me know how you get on with Wenman sometime. Go ahead from Victoria.
Yeah, I'm actually in Saanich, but...
we'll forgive you. Carry on.
I'm living in a government-assisted home.
Right.
Which was opened a year ago by the former Lieutenant Governor, his last, one of his last jobs. The building is falling apart in a year's time.
You mean, what do you mean falling apart? Just how badly is it falling apart?
Cracking at the seams, each hallway and each room. None of the doors open. Some of the windows have been...
What kind of project is this?
It was sponsored under the federal and provincial housing program for low renters.
It's a low rental.
A low rental for seniors, is it?
That's affirmative.
It's and you say the doors won't open?
Well, all through the building, there's...
Which society runs it?
Well, I don't think I should say...
Well, perhaps you could tell me off the air. Is it bad enough to show up on television?
Well, I think it would.
I mean, can you see the cracks?
Oh, definitely.
Can you demonstrate that the doors don't open?
Affirmative.
And it was only opened a year ago by Walter Owen?
Affirmative.
And it's a visible disaster area, is it?
Right.
Well, Linda, perhaps you could take that gentleman's name and telephone call, and we'll protect his confidentiality, and who knows, there might be something in it for us.
I would like to ask Jack one other question.
Sure.
Why he didn't ask Evan Wolfe why the government didn't establish at least and a minimum of a $1 par value on his shares, which he claims is corporation is worth. If he's going to give away anything, he should at least give away Bennett dollars. And
Thank you, sir. No point in asking these questions.
thank you.
I went through it in spades with both Halliwell and Bennett. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster, can I ask your guest one question concerning the budget that was brought down? It's a question that nobody seemed to come up with.
Try him.
They increased the working dues from $250 to $500, but they didn't increase the 3%. They left it the same. So the lady that was on here, that her husband made $4 an hour, doesn't help him one bit. Now, I'm saying this because, fine, this helps my wife.
I mean deduction for working expenses under the Income Tax Act.
Yeah.
That's true. That's very true. 10% of nothing is nothing.
My wife and I, this helps us very fine because we're in the high income bracket, and we could, at 3%, the $500 still doesn't cover us. But the guy that's on the low income
doesn't help him. Okay, here's what Dean Whiteway says.
Well, that's a good point. And I'm a little reluctant to make, out of my area of some knowledge, to make rash statements of all the kinds of things that, you know, we talk about in caucus and things we want to do. So I won't make any commitment. I won't make any political promises or statements.
Your own opinion.
But I've already said that I come from a working, poor family. And in my opinion, not a party position, but in my opinion, the basic exemption for Canadians is far too low. It doesn't reflect at all.
The people at the low end of the scale.
Right, that's right.
Thank you. Dean Whiteway and Webster. Now. Dean Whiteway from Selkirk, Tory, you certainly have covered your subjects well. You're basically a teacher, I think you began to tell me.
Yes, sir.
How long have you been in Parliament?
I was elected in '74, but it was always my intention, but since I was 15, to go into federal politics, so...
You do, Nova Scotians, New Brunswick, all seem to have this drive for power.
Not drive for power, sir, drive to make confederation, to make this country work.
Yeah,
After all, we have a vested interest, you know. It was blue noses and heron chokers that really got the act together in 1867.
You get no argument from me on the subject. Only Mr. Diefenbaker was around at that time. Even I wasn't around at that time.
Diefenbaker and Stanley Knowles.
Yeah, Stanley Knowles, the pair of them. Right. Time for a couple of calls just. Are you going out to look at a project in Surrey this afternoon?
Yes.
A bad one?
A bad one.
Really fallen down, broken up?
Well, three of the four families have walked away from their homes, and the other one is leaving.
Are there just the 4 homes in the scheme?
Yes, in this particular project.
And what do they do when they walk away?
Well, it's pretty tough because they really, what they lose when they walk away...
Have they still got to pay back the money?
No, they don't have to pay back the money. But
the subsidy?
No. But what they lose is the hope and the dream and the expectations that they had when they moved in. Most Canadians want to live in their own home. Yeah. And so when they can't afford it, they walk away, and what happens is they become cynical and caustic against a government program that they believe misled them. And that has all kinds of negative things. They get down on the government, they get down on the country, and they feel that they have been, in essence, I guess, cheated. And that's the tragedy of AHOP.
I wonder if that guy was right when he said they gave far too many homes to single parents who couldn't cope with them and had to walk away discouraged. Yeah. Because it was the cheapest housing available.
Yeah.
So you'd really put it under a social plan of some kind, plus the 7% mortgages, the 8% mortgages, back in the hands of the individual.
Yes.
Well, that's good. What about the election? You're a shoo-in, I presume, in Winnipeg.
Well, I'm optimistic.
Who's against you, Andy, I know?
No.
No.
No, the only one you know is one who brags about me being his member of parliament. That's the new Governor General.
Ed.
Yes, he used to be my MLA, and I used to be his member of parliament.
Now he's your Governor General.
And now he's my Governor
And
General.
you're not to call him Ed.
No, sir, it's Edward.
Because the announcement came out from Government House on that. It's Edward Schreier.
Yes, so yes.
What do you call him, Ed?
I will call him His Excellency.
His Excellency. Okay, we started social credit Wolfe this morning. We continued with a very bright Tory. See, there are some around. Dean Whiteway. Going to finish up with another political scientist, because I want to get something off my chest, with Ed Broadbent. I think you would call it a slew of politicians when I come up with a third in the morning. This is, apart from the Faris case, I talked to Broadbent, the national leader of the NDP, on some other important issues. Let's see what he says. You have one great advantage as a politician, Mr. Broadbent.
Yes?
You want to know what it is?
Whisper.
You're a very nice, relaxed kind of a guy. Mind you, you'll never be Prime Minister, so you can afford to be. Is that not correct?
You couldn't say a total sentence that was complimentary. You had to add that hooker about not being...
Do not mention the word hooker in British Columbia.
I'm not going to talk about hooker.
But first of all, let's talk about... Did you ever think that one of your boys would finish up as the Governor-General of Canada?
I don't like that laughing attitude at all. Of course I thought that at some time a Prime Minister of this country would recognize the distinguished contribution made by a member of the New Democratic Party, and I'm particularly pleased that he was a Western Canadian.
You mean the Prime Minister or the Governor-General?
The Governor-General.
Can you still call him Ed?
A directive has just come out, I understand, that says that for public occasions he is to be addressed as Edward. The Globe and Mail, all Canadians will note, will be pleased. But I suspect most of us in private will continue
We'll
to
still
say
call him Ed. Okay, down to business. The grain trade's surely in a mess, isn't it?
The grain trade is in a mess, but can we switch to something that I do think is serious and that I've been talking about while I'm in British Columbia, and that is the fishery in British Columbia. I have been amazed. For example, the premier of this province was the only premier of any province that was mentioned in a cabinet document which I released in Ottawa earlier this week, who expressed concern about the federal government dealing with the problem of foreign ownership in Canada. The government of British Columbia and Premier Bennett was singled out as being the one government that said nothing should be done.
You mean
about the problem of foreign ownership. And here in this province, with one of the great fisheries in the world, just in the last couple of years, we've had an infusion in the fish processing industry of somewhere between $20 and $40 million from Japan.
Herring trade?
Across the board in the processing part of the industry.
You mean they're taking over some of our big established companies?
They now have, of the 60 companies in the processing of fish, they have interest in 1/5 of them. They are obviously planning to expand. They are now in the process of doing with the industry in the Canadian part of the the coast, exactly what they did in the Alaskan fishery. A few years ago, the Japanese began to invest in the fishery there. They now control it. It's extremely important.
Just a minute. Are you telling me this is a new development of which we are not aware?
I'm not sure if you're
You're
aware.
telling me that 20% of 60 firms have been taken over by the Japanese
Not
without...
taken over, they have interest. They have interest in
heavy investments.
Heavy investments.
How many companies do they control?
How many do they control? I don't have a precise
I mean, the
figure
big
on-
ones are Canfisco and
I don't have a
PC
I don't have a
Packers.
precise
Which
figure.
companies?
I don't have a list of names.
Why not?
Well, I can give you some information, and
I'd like to know the names.
Well, I don't have the names with me. I'm telling you that we can show that of the 60 in the industry, 1/5 of them are involved in terms of having major shareholders outside the country. Now that the issue that's at stake here is Canadians losing control of a very important fishery, a section of our industry in the country as a whole, and particularly for this province, that's crucial. We now have the 200-mile limit. The last couple of years have been good for fishing in general in the province, but we have, in a Japanese market, one of the most important markets in the world. Now, instead of Canadians controlling that industry, as we should be, the processing as well as the fishermen themselves,
You're talking about processing.
they are coming in.
You're not talking about fishing.
And they're going to control. We should be controlling it and selling the product to them, not the other way around. They're coming in, controlling it, and then they will sell it to their own preserved market.
Mr. Broadbent, I know many fishermen who get down every night on their knees and bow towards Tokyo and thank God for the Japanese.
Yes, I know
because the Japanese came in here last year and they pushed up the price of herring roll from $250 a ton to $1,200 a ton.
Absolutely, and that's
What's
tremendous.
wrong with that?
Not a thing. That's
These
tremendous.
guys are making $25,000 a week on the herring fishing.
That's what I'm saying. The industry's doing very well, and the reason the
Thanks
Japanese...
to the Japanese.
I'm not attacking the Japanese.
I thought you were.
No, I'm attacking...
Well, sure you were.
Well, you're entitled to your mistakes.
Wasn't listening, was I?
No, that's precisely the point, but you said it, and I'm polite, and I don't want to underline the fact.
What's the danger?
The problem is the people in the industry here in British Columbia went to the Japanese for financial assistance because they couldn't get it from the banks. They couldn't get it from federal government institutions. We have established in Canada the Canadian Development Corporation, set up in 1971 to help Canadian business. It has in fact expanded more in terms of its job-creating opportunities outside of Canada than inside. The Canadian Development Corporation should have been in assisting Canadian processors so they wouldn't have to become dependent on Japanese financing. It's very important. I'm not attacking the Japanese.
No, the trouble was...
Not at all. I am attacking Canadian politicians, the federal politicians, who didn't take the steps in terms of a strategy for the West Coast fishery that it would have ensured that those in the industry here who needed the money got Canadian money.
In other words, you wouldn't ban the Japanese, you'd just ask the Canadian Development Corporation and Canadian businessmen to waken up.
To do two things. No, we should tighten control in terms of foreign ownership, but we shouldn't leave it at that negative restrictive level. We should in fact move in with financing from Canada for those who need it.
You made your point. Now the next one. I'll give you a nice clear opening where you can make a nice simple attack.
A nice simple attack.
What is your response to the victory by Premier Bill Bennett over Big Julie Sinclair of Canadian Pacific Investments? Big Julie surrendered and has not mailed the offer to take over, to bid for majority control of Mac and Blow. What is your response to Mr. Bennett's action?
I think it's sheer hypocrisy. Mr. Bennett's government hasn't been concerned about the problem of foreign ownership. I just mentioned a cabinet document that says it's the one government that hasn't been concerned about American takeovers or takeovers from any other country. Suddenly, capital comes from Eastern Canada. And for political reasons, because he's gone down in the Gallup poll here, I understand, suddenly he's going to be a BC nationalist. My concern about that is that what that can do is discourage investment capital from other parts of Canada
from
to
Canada,
come in.
from British Columbia.
Exactly.
All right, let me try and get a specific answer. Do you regard Mr. Bennett's hypocritical political action to protect his BC image as a form of separatism?
As a form of separatism? No, I'm not going to say Mr. Bennett is a separatist. I am going to say that
economic separatist.
Well, yes, but to the disadvantage of the people of British Columbia, because investment capital, Canadian capital, in this province should be welcome from any part of Canada, just as investment. The people in Atlantic Canada, for example, for years have been saying they would like some capital from Montreal or Toronto or Winnipeg to come down to Nova Scotia.
Just to sum it up, if we had a newspaper in this town which wasn't closed down by reactionary unions and greedy publishers, would it say that...
You're so diplomatic.
Do you not want me to be forthright?
Go ahead.
Ed Broadbent today accused Bennett of BC of being a short-sighted political hypocrite with double heads, whereby he encourages foreign ownership but discourages Eastern Canadian investment.
I think that's a very succinct way of understating the
Wish we
problem.
had a newspaper.
Yes, I do too.
Anyway, how's it looking, Ed, for the election? Not so good, eh?
No, for the government, I agree
No,
entirely. I
no.
think they're in a lot of trouble.
But they've got one big asset, haven't they? What's their biggest asset, the Liberal government?
Joe Clark. And
You
the
picked it up
Conservative
right
Party.
on cue.
The biggest asset of the government of the day is the official opposition. The official opposition in almost any policy matter doesn't differ from the government. In fact, I was just astounded when Joe Clark, as leader of the opposition, ostensibly concerned with Canadian economic development, he goes over to Japan and he says he'd be glad to welcome in more branch plants and would give away our oil, export our oil instead of, processing it here and exporting petrochemical products. He'd like to give it to the Japanese. Well, of course, he went to Israel and he gave the same oil away to the Israelis. But this man, as leader of the official opposition, a few months ago in Parliament, was attacking Petro-Canada, a crown corporation that now is doing something at long last about developing Canadian resources for the benefit of Canadians. Joe Clark and the Tories are attacking. The one reasonable thing, in fact, that the federal government has been responsible for doing in a positive way, the official opposition is attacked. I don't think their economic...
Don't you have some personal sympathy for them, the way these traveling Boy Scouts from the Ottawa Press Gallery are carving him up on or from across the country, are carving him up on every occasion?
Look,
loses his underwear, big fuss.
I look as a politician, of course I do. I mean, I've from time to time have been subjected to that myself. Would you believe it? I mean, they've said some nasty things.
I mean, he doesn't travel with a military advance guard and a government jet. He's buying his own way.
Marine is the advance guard.
I feel kind of sorry for him.
Well, I don't think that's why do you feel sorry for him? I don't think anyone should feel sorry for Joe or myself or the Prime Minister. We're public people, and if we goof, in a serious policy way, we should get criticism, but I don't think we ought to get sympathy.
Do you not feel that due to Clark's ineffectiveness, which is admitted, I think, by and large, that this government faces a minority Liberal government after the next election? If you come up at all?
I would think that the reasonable forecast under the circumstances is exactly that.
Minority Liberal?
No, minority government. I'm not at all sure which way it's going to go. You know, in Corner Brook, in the by-elections, before the by-election took place, in the last election we had just over 4% of the vote in that constituency. We waged a very tough-minded, resource-based campaign with jobs as its focus, and we won the seat. It's true. In Canada, from Ontario West, we're running around 25 to 30% in the Gallup, in a regional breakdown, which puts us ahead of the Liberals. I like to be doing much better than that nationally, but I haven't any doubt at all when the election campaign comes, we're going to be taking much more seriously than ever before, and because we're going to be talking about direct, important questions like controlling our own future.
Final short question. Ed Broadbent's best prospect, simple yes or no, is a balance of power in a divided three-way parliament.
Best prospect is forming the government of Canada.
No, be honest.
The best prospect.
Be honest.
No, I'm being honest.
The best
prospect.
The best practical prospect.
The best prospect is forming the government of Canada. That's the target. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Mr. Broadbent. I had called him Mr. Schreier by accident when we were preparing to do the interview. He's a bright guy, but he's a bit late on the Japanese investment issue, I do really think. Now we'll take a break. I hope I handled that Bennett thing okay this morning. All I could do was sum up in the final analysis and say it's only 73 million, and it either went to people of BC or it was into brick. Might as well.
That's right. That's right.
The secret is
what I can't figure out is.
Love it.
I know you have a little surprise for me, but first, what's on tomorrow?
Tomorrow we have Herb Gray
Oh,
and
Liberal Maverick.
Dan McDonald, the Veterans Affairs Minister.
I've never, ever interviewed the Veterans Affairs Minister. However, what is this surprise you have for me? Said he's shuddering.
On this appropriate day, I thought perhaps you'd like to have this.
What is it?
It's a sporran.
What is a sporran?
A sporran is a...
It's an article of clothing.
Skin.
No, it's an article of clothing worn by a kiltie in Highland dress.
That's right.
I think we don't know who sent it, but we think it came from somebody connected with the BC Pipers.
Yes, and
Let
I
me
think
see
it was
it.
very...
It's not a bad one. Not bad at all.
Will
But
you
there's
put it
bad
on?
news with it. The BC Pipers, where am I, have reason to believe that war should be declared with the United States. Because if you take one of these made of sealskin across the U.S. border, they're liable to confiscate it, because it's a breach of their laws. I never knew a better reason for war. Happy Robbie Burns Day. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.